Hello and welcome back to Bourbon Barrel Talk. I'm your host, Scott Minton. Today we are sitting down with Matt Gandolfo with Penrod Ricard. He is the master taster. And Matt, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I really appreciate it. I want to give you kudos for pronouncing Penrod Ricard perfectly. And yeah, Gandolfo pretty well as well.
No, listen, I did my best. I got marble mouth, so sometimes I start talking and I just get ahead of myself. I think what happens is with me sometimes I talk faster than I think, or I think really, really fast, and then I try to catch up with my mouth. I'm not really sure. But sometimes I marble it out real good, so I'm glad I got it right.
Those weren't marbles.
Those aren't marbles?
That's also a sign of intelligence.
Is that really it?
No.
I thought cursing was. Because if that's the case, I'm like a genius. I'm like Albert Einstein. Anyway, so Matt, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for joining us. But before we get crazy deep, man, tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey in the whiskey world, and how did you get here today, working for Penrod?
Yeah, I'm in the industry now. I look around at my peers, and I realize I think I have a very unique origin story, the path that's not usually taken. My first stop was at Jim Beam. Before then, it was the summer after college. I was thinking about what I want to do with my life, and I applied to law school, and I got in, actually. And I was excited about that. That was great. And I spent the summer talking to 10, 11, 12 different lawyers, sat down, had lunch with them, and every single one of them was saying, man, if I could do it all over again, I probably want to do this. So I started getting some cold feet when it came to the law school thing, and I thought to myself, in a 22, 23-year-old perspective, what do I want to do with my life? And that was really when bourbon was picking up some momentum. There was more buzz. Because, even growing up in Kentucky, bourbon was always part of the culture here. But outside the state, it didn't have the same weight it does now. But it started getting that momentum. I thought, man, maybe there's something to this bourbon thing. And I had a friend at Jim Beam, great dude, Craig Whiter, who's part of the sales team for Jim Beam now. He was able to give me an interview, and I hopped on board as a distillery ambassador, which is basically a tour guide for Jim Beam for a while. And that was a great intro to the industry, gave me a chance to be around distillery, be around great people, soak in knowledge. Fred Noe was around quite a bit back then. Freddie was just starting to be a part of it. So it was cool to see it grow, and I was actually there during the Suntory acquisition. So it was interesting to see that go down and, be a part of that shift. After Jim Beam, I became national brand ambassador for Wild Turkey, which was a great opportunity. Obviously, Jimmy Russell, Eddie Russell, they're big figures in themselves. So a chance for me to travel around the country for 2 or 3 years and, I like to say carry Jimmy's bags around, but it was a cool opportunity to see how he went through his tastings, how he connected with people. So much of this industry is how can you connect with the consumer? How can you show authenticity to what we're doing? Because this is very much a cultural piece to our state, and I wanted to keep that spirit very much alive. I did that. I was on the road about. Sorry, Brian. Did you?
No, I was just going to say pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I was doing that for a few years. I was on the road about 40 weeks out of the year, jumping from state to state, market to market. They literally had a tour bus that they fitted out to be a distillery experience. So I would go across the country with this tour bus, give tastings, give people a little piece of Kentucky, whatever market we were at, and talk about a huge benefit to see how other people perceive bourbon. Like I said, we're in this bourbon bubble. So for me to go out there and see how an average Californian approaches it, see someone who's never tried whiskey before dive into Wild Turkey 101, it was a really cool experience, and I was appreciative, but when the time came to start a family, you can't be on the road 40 weeks out of the year. So
makes it tough.
It does. It really does. And so I thought, what's my next step? And, when you spend that much time talking the talk, you realize, shit, maybe I want to try walking the walk a little bit. And I wanted to get my feet wet in the operations side. Easier said than done. A lot of these big distilleries, there's unions there. So you got to work your way up, and you're working night shift, and so that doesn't really work for a family either. And I knew a distillery called Rabbit Hole was being built in the Nulu neighborhood of Louisville. So I start poking around a little bit, got a contact for Cave, who's been a great mentor to me, since 2017, really, when I first met him. Cameron Talley, who's the head of operations at Rabbit Hole, a really great guy who has basically taught me everything I've known about the operations side. I was able to talk my way into giving some marketing guy a chance at operations, which is not a common path for someone who did what I did, but I was a part of the original distilling team at Rabbit Hole, and as I mentioned before to y'all, I did that for 2.5 years. Moved over to the maturation side as warehouse manager, and then just recently got promoted to be master taster of Penrod Ricard, which is the company who purchased Rabbit Hole, and that acquisition was complete this past July. So we were going from an independent distillery and kind of a startup, unique environment to partnering with the second biggest spirits company in the world. So it's a shift right now that I think is going to be incredible for Rabbit Hole as we continue to grow.
So as we dive a little bit deeper into that, and it's really, really neat to see that you've kind of wet your whistle with like some of the biggest places, starting out at the bottom, worked your way into more of an independent type thing. Like, what brands fall under the Pernod brand and label?
Pernod Ricard.
Penrod. Well, Pernod is fine. I mean, do I have to say Ricard every time?
We're friends. Pernod's fine. We can keep it short. No, great question, because Pernod...
Because not everybody might not know, right?
No, because they haven't really been that present in the American whiskey game for a while. They actually used to own Wild Turkey. And so that was their one gem in the American whiskey world, and then they sold to Campari. I actually think it was a trade. They traded Campari to get Absolute Vodka at the time, which seemed like a good idea. And then as soon as they did that, bourbon took off like crazy.
Right.
So I think ever since that Wild Turkey trade, they're like, we got to get back at this American whiskey game. So they went through a buying spree about 5 years ago where they purchased 80% of Rabbit Hole, 100% of Jefferson's, 100% of Smooth Ambler, and then a great whiskey down in Texas, TX whiskey. And so there's 4 American whiskeys that are in what we call NADL. It's the North American Distillers section of the Pernod Ricard. So in a lot of ways, we're, now that Rabbit Hole is 100% owned by Pernod Ricard, we are starting fresh and starting to piece together new strategies on how to get these brands out there and how can we synergize with each other yet still have these unique stories. So, for Rabbit Hole, what we want to lean into, unique mash bills and finishes. So we don't have standard mash bills, really. Our Cave Hill product is a 4-grain bourbon. Our High Gold, which I brought a bottle of, is a malted rye, which is a little unique. We do have a standard rye recipe that really came from Larry Ebersol, who was the top dog over at MGP in Indiana for a long time. Yep. He was the person that came in when we first started distilling, and he showed us the ropes for 2 weeks. So I geeked out over that because he's the godfather of rye. So we have that classic Larry Ebersol 95% rye whiskey recipe for the Boxer Grail, which is a delicious product. And then our Derringer is a wheated bourbon, classic wheated, that we finish in a sherry cask.
Right. And then the Jefferson's is one of the other labels. So Jefferson's is, to me, it's mainly known for Reserve and Oceans.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit more about that piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, what a great story. Even before I was at Rabbit Hole, when I was at Wild Turkey, I remember hearing a ton about Jefferson's. Trey Zoller, his dad Chet has always been kind of a staple in the industry. Rest in peace, he has passed away this past year, but he was a historian who was deep-rooted in the industry. And, the story before I was really involved at all was, they were one of the first people to source barrels. They were going out and trying to hand select the best barrels they could find from certain distilleries. And it truly is a blending story before anyone was really blending in Kentucky. So it's been exciting to learn more about that brand. I'm still very fresh when it comes to the Jeffersons and Smooth Ambler and TX side, but I'm learning a ton from the team right now, and it's exciting because the origins come from the sourcing barrels from different distilleries and not being locked in with this one place, but truly just trying to find something that's unique. And getting introduced to blending, a person on my team who has been helping open my eyes to that world, Ali Ochoa, who's a great young blender. She the way she goes about it, it's almost like you have different colors on a palette, and you are able to just create this very unique specialty product that the opportunity to buy from different distilleries offers you. We have different products from across the state that we piece together and make something beautiful. Now, the interesting thing is, due to the success of Jefferson's, we are actually building a distillery in Lebanon, Kentucky now. And this will be the first time that Jefferson's will actually have that flagship distillery. So things are going to shift. So now the question is, how do we integrate? How can we keep that blending story and but have the benefit of having our own distillery? So that means multiple mash bills, a strong game plan now on what's the best blends that we've put together for Jefferson's and how can we replicate those the best we can. And I'm sure, as you all know, no matter how much you try with mash bills and yeast strains and using similar barrels, the geography of a distillery is just going to naturally shift the flavor profile. So no matter how hard we try, it's not going to be a perfect match to past releases, but this is very much a new beginning for Jefferson's to solidify itself in the bourbon industry, having its own distillery like that.
So as being a master taster, right, like you taste a lot of stuff, and you've been in the room with blenders and things like that. I always considered Smooth Ambler to be kind of the daddy of sourced whiskey. I mean, like, to me, like, they were getting the MGP 36% rise. Those 9 and 10-year-olds were flying out, and they're honestly some of my favorite bottles I've ever had. I mean, I can't tell you the number of those that were just absolutely just bangers, just delicious ones. What's it like sitting in a room with other people that have that knowledge, that's been doing it for a long time, and being able to pick their brain, right? Like, because really blending is an art form like that. I would love to just be the fly on the wall of like listening to people talk through that process.
100%. And the way we operate, just so we have two, I don't call Ali a master taster, but she very much is still. She is the master blender for Jefferson's. Another person on my team is Jake Vollmer, who's a master taster as well, and his specialty is really finishing. So I got these two people who have this unbelievable experience, and I would be naive not to see the opportunity to just learn and soak in that knowledge from them, especially coming from someone from my background where I'm not the most technical guy. I have experience in the ops world, but I also have dipped my toes into the marketing world. So the marketing side of me is like, how can I absorb this knowledge from these other two people on my team to best suit the brand when I go out and I'm storytelling? Because really, we call it the CWO team, because Kaveh Zamanian, who's the founder of Rabbit Hole, he is the new chief whiskey officer of Penrod Ricard, which, you talk about titles, that's a hell of a title there.
That's badass.
Yeah. Wow. Chief whiskey officer, the CWO.
CWO. Right. So we're the CWO team. So I very much work side by side with them, and I absorb that. And our three main functions are liquid creation, innovation, and storytelling. And my palate, palates are interesting things because there's a certain level of arrogance for someone to come out and be like, "Oh man, I got the best palate out here," and we talked about this before. It's like everyone's palates work in different ways. So there's plenty of times that we're putting blends together where we disagree on things, but it's nice to have different perspectives. And I really think the value that we all bring is the confidence that ultimately it's not about the little details and the flavors that we're getting, because I'm more prone to pick up buttery notes where, a lot of times Ali and Jake are talking about vegetal notes and different dark fruit notes. And, just from the structure of our palates, we pick up different flavors. It really comes down to how good is the overall product, not breaking it down to individual flavors and esters and different aspects of the liquid, not deconstructing it, but overall, how is this viewed as the total package of whiskey? So it's been, to answer your question, it's been a great opportunity for me to see different perspectives, because when I was in the maturation side, you're almost stuck in these warehouses, and I'm tasting different barrels, and I'm trying to pinpoint what flavors are coming from different parts of the warehouse. And that was always an exciting thing for me, because I remember vividly when I was at Jim Beam, you hear these old timers talk about which are the best warehouses. The warehouses that have been around for 30, 40 years or even longer. And I remember building these warehouses for Rabbit Hole thinking, damn, I bet one day I'm going to be this old timer who has been a part of this. Because when you're building new warehouses, you're kind of going in blind. You don't really understand the true personalities of these warehouses. So, that's one big thing for us right now is how can we hone in on where is the best place to age High Gold versus Cave Hill with the different mash bills? Because, you hear the folks at Jim Beam saying, oh, Baker's always the top floors of the rick houses. Booker's in the interior and the middle floors. And of course, I'm being fed this one on the marketing side, so they just want me to hear what they want me to say what they want me to hear, basically. But there is truth that different parts of the warehouses, different rick houses, yield different flavors. So to be a part of this journey from the very beginning and to formalize these findings, it's a unique opportunity itself as well.
Good deal. Let's dive into a little whiskey here before Nick asks his question. I know he's been chomping at the bit. I've been cutting him off.
No, it's all good.
What, are we drinking?
Right. That's never happened before.
Jefferson's product first, or are we drinking the Rabbit Hole first?
Yeah, I brought in a Rabbit Hole finished product, so we'll save that for last.
Okay.
I did bring in the Jefferson's Tropic, and when I was sitting in the office today, I was talking to some of the brand ambassadors about what's a good one to show off, and I went with the Tropics just because of my passion really is on the maturation side and how that whiskey interacts with the barrel through different environments. And what makes this unique is we'll take a 5-6-year-old product that's aged in Kentucky, then we'll put it on shipping containers, send it over to Singapore where it's super humid and it's super hot. And, that heat just drives that whiskey into the wood. And, who am I to tell people what notes you get off of it? I want you all to try it and see what you think. But at the same time, people see Tropics and they think they're going to get a day at the beach.
No, that ain't happening.
Yeah, pineapple and rum.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
I want some ramen.
Yeah, it's not a pina colada.
No, rum.
Oh, I thought you said ramen. I'm like, I want ramen.
Yeah. But this one, because of the heat and the humidity exposure, it really drives that whiskey into the wood more. You get more robust tannins in there, and I'll let you all give it a try and see your thoughts.
The nose right off the bat is just insanely different. Like, I mean, it's given off almost like that VDN-esque, like citrusy, like
I'm getting raisin.
fruit. Yeah, I could see raisin,
Yeah.
but I'm getting like almost like mango and like it's just all kinds of weird, like
it's creamy,
light creamy
on the
fruit.
nose. Yeah. So for the barrels that are, it's like, so tell us about these shipping containers. Are they? Is it palletized? Are they how are they in there?
Yeah, it's one level laid out, so you can get about probably 75 to 80 barrels in there. And everyone knows the Jefferson's ocean story and how we send them over and they take certain voyages, and I think that's very unique. And we were talking about before how in an ideal world, I would love to see a different voyage every time that yields different results, and these flavors are very much like a single barrel where, hey, if you fall in love with a voyage, you better go on that treasure hunt and try to gobble those bottles up.
Yep, buy them up. Yeah.
What's interesting is we're talking to the brand team and I'm learning more about Jefferson's. It's like, well, this is shipped over to Singapore, so it goes on its little mini voyage anyway. So it's still getting that movement that we like to talk about with Ocean. It just has a 12 to 18 month layover in Singapore, and then it still has that movement coming back. So, it's almost the same benefits you get from Ocean, but just that heat exposure is what drives this. And you were talking about there are unique flavors on the front end of the palate on this, but what is consistent is that peppery, oaky flavor on the finish. It really does pop. But the barrel comes out for me greatly on the back end of the palate.
Yeah, you get a lot of dry tannins, through that mid-late palate, and then you get kind of just that little subtle spice kind of coming through on that. Now, one interesting thing is, on the podcast before, we've talked about barrels and, what happens, and we've talked with, just different groups and distillers on, that cycling of the barrels. And it's weird for me to hear that because, yes, you're right. Heat, it's going to push it out, push it in deep. But there's got to be that return cycle as well at some point. And, sometimes whenever you talk about, high humidity, not much of that kind of like air, we'll say angel share, really can get out. That just can, in just sitting in a cycled warehouse or just a normal warehouse with the seasons going by. So I wouldn't think it'd be, it seems to be a little bit darker than what I would probably think that it should be because of that angel share not quite squeezing out because of humidity. It's stretching out those barrel staves to be tighter than normal because of that heat and humidity.
No, I think in what you're kind of leaning into, which is a big question in our industry, and something I think about an awful lot, is what is the ideal aging environment for barrels? And that's not really something that we're going after. We're not saying, hey, the way we do Tropics is the best way to age whiskey. And I know you're not saying that either, but I do think it's worth bringing up because I had the same thoughts myself about, okay, just because it's exposed to high heat and high humidity for 18 months doesn't mean it's going to be a better whiskey, but it's going to yield creative results. And that's what's been really cool to learn about Jefferson's is the passion to be creative and to yield different flavor profiles and to see how these different unique decisions yield a product that's different than anything you tried before. Diving into the world of the cycling of temperatures. We work very closely with our cooperages. Rabbit Hole has a great relationship with Kelvin Cooperage. And the craze right now is toasted barrels, and we've been toasting our barrels from day one through Kelvin, which has been cool to see people appreciate that. And then we work with Independent Stave Company for our Jefferson barrels. And, we really lean into them on the science of barrel maturation. They are committed to understanding more about what happens with that liquid. And what's coming out now is, when I was coming up, it was all about those hot Kentucky summers and those cold, harsh winters. But what we're seeing now is the major change is really in those fall and spring months when you wake up and it's 40 degrees, but by the time it's lunch, it's 70 degrees. It's those rapid temperature changes that really yield the major changes when we're aging whiskey.
Well, you're talking about 4 seasons in Kentucky in 1 week. What?
Yeah, no. And I always say, when I was back on the road with Wild Turkey, it's almost like the good Lord looked at Kentucky and said, "This is the best place to make whiskey." And I love thinking about how I know it's annoying for people who live here. When we're going through these Octobers that are, you wake up and you're bundled up, and then by the time it's lunchtime, you're shedding all your clothes. But at the same time, it does yield a beautiful result and allows us to make a product that a lot of people can't make in the world.
Yeah, so I agree with that 100%. I think the Midwest is definitely one of the places that whiskey flourishes because of the climate. And also, I think there is some validity to the fact of, like, you're close to a great water source. You're close to, wood, where it's manufactured, all that stuff comes. I think most of it comes from Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. I mean, so the bulk of the oak, that's where it comes from. So I think that helps. So back to this pour, like, is it just me, or is there like a crazy amount of like yeasty, like front to mid palate, and then I'm really, really picking up like that peppery, like oaky, like on the back.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I'm getting slight yeasty, but it's just that kind of oak tannin starts about late palate and just kind of permeates through it. I call it almost like a seasoned wood spice, almost, that's kind of flying in there.
What's the proof on this? Like 105 or 100 point?
It is 52%, so it's 104.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
When you say yeast, I more so like if you've got yeast rolls in the oven, the smell that it gives, I don't get it as much on the taste.
Yeah,
it's got super sweetness and it's got some dryness. It's got the oak.
Right.
And as you mentioned earlier, it almost tastes finished.
Yeah.
And something like incredibly sweet and buttery and enticing.
Yeah.
So for your barrels, like do you all share like the char levels, if they're toasted?
Yeah, we so traditionally at Jefferson's we're not toasting any of our barrels. Char level 3 is where we stick with. So a relatively traditional barrel that we use for this product, and that's another thing that as we are approaching the opening of this new distillery, what can we do to yield unique results with the barrel. And one thing that Allie has talked about as the master blender was, is there a way to play around char 1 barrels now? Because that's another thing that for a long time in the industry, everyone's like, char 3, char 4, that's what we're going to go with. Give me an alligator char. People weren't really branching out from that point because, if it ain't broke, why fix it? But as we're diving into different char levels and running it through a GCMS, we're actually on a molecular level seeing how different char levels interact with the whiskey. You're yielding very desirable results with a char 1 barrel and maybe with a light toast as well. So there's different combinations that people are diving into to bring more complexity to to the maturation process.
And is that science? Is that in house, or is that at the two companies that you get your barrels from?
Yeah, it's very collaborative, and so it's not uncommon for us to drive to Lebanon and stop into Independent Stave for a couple hours, and Andrew Willenbrink is who we work with there, and he really heads up a lot of the research for Independent Stave, and he gives us a unique perspective that is not driven by the business of bourbon, but just the quality of the barrel and how it interacts with the whiskey. So they're great partners with us, and much like the industry as a whole, no matter if you're working distillery and cooperage or distilleries working together, there's such a collaborative essence to this industry that is greatly appreciated.
It's funny. I literally just posted a post yesterday about barrels and the difference between chars and toasting, and you're talking all this lingo and jargon. And I read like 4 or 5 articles, and that's what made me think of to post what I posted. And the one thing that I saw, and it was kind of almost identical to what you had just said. A lot of distilleries, I think, are moving to toasting the barrel for 30, 40 minutes at that low level heat, and then coming in with like a char 2. And because I'm hearing a lot of that, like, is where people are like, is that really where the sweet spot's going to land? Because I think you're right. Like, the majority of people are using 3. You have a handful of distilleries that are going 4 because they just want, quick access into the barrel and run that way. But it is really, really odd and ironic that toasting of the barrel gets off different lactones that go into the whiskey more. I guess the way that I understood it by reading it, and listen, I have to read sometimes 5 times to understand it completely, is that it gives off those desirable notes, those vanillas and those caramels, because that toasting is like helps the way the whiskey goes in and out of that barrel.
Yeah, I mean, toasting is basically just like a warm-up for the barrel before it gets charred. So it exposes those wood sugars and brings them more to the surface, so they are more they're more approachable for the liquid to absorb them basically at that point. And the science that goes into maturation has been really cool. And I also think there's a certain level of magic and artistry that comes in. Like, you could have a lot of barrels with 22 barrels in there, and they all have the exact same barrel type, but they're all going to come out a little bit different. So I do love the magic that does happen in the warehouse regardless.
Yeah. There's definitely some alchemy that goes with that whole process.
No doubt, yeah.
And for those that may not know all the barrel stuff, is what you're saying comparable to a reverse sear? Like, you'd put a steak in for 200 degrees for 45 minutes, you pull it out, you let it rest, and then you hit it with high heat. Is that kind of the...
No, I think there's a component to that. There's a culinary sense to that it definitely ties in a little bit as far as exposure to heat and how that does alter flavor profiles.
Look at the fat guy bringing up sous vide.
No, I feel that.
And for the record, I don't care for sous vide. Just it looks ugly.
Yeah.
No, reverse sear, but I'll cover it in aluminum foil.
Right.
Just so it comes up to about 100 degrees, and then I let it come down, and then I go high heat.
Yeah.
Then I burn the bitch.
It smells like a different podcast. You need to start up. We need to start a spinoff here, I think.
That's right. Bourbon and burgers, or
who wouldn't love that?
Steak and whatever. Yeah, we can figure something out, I'm sure.
Steak and whiskey.
So funny. I was going to originally do this thing. I was going to do bourbon and bogeys. We were going to talk golf and drink bourbon, but I was like, I don't really. I'm such.
We never would have met.
I'm such a bad golfer.
Or how about bourbon and putt-putt?
Yeah, I could do that.
Or do you say putt-putt? You guys say miniature golf? What's your...
I use either. I think they're interchangeable.
I have to use putt-putt because there was actually one that was nearby that was actually named putt-putt. Yeah. It was the group that had the arcade in it too.
Yeah. I'm much more of a putt-putt guy.
But quarters or tokens?
Oh, quarters.
So let's dive back into Rabbit Hole. Like Rabbit Hole has those, unique expressions. They've got some things that they've got definitely going on. Yeah, I am a big Boxer Grill fan. Like it's probably my favorite of the mash bills and of what they're releasing. But I'll tell you, the one bottle that's still like, and I've never bought one because I never got the chance to buy one. But man, I've drank it probably 7 or 8 times, and every time I've tried it, I love it. Is the Race King.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a baby?
The Race King has honestly grown on me, and I was a distiller when we first started making Race King, and just the addition of the chocolate malt into that, I couldn't believe how it changed everything, even in the fermentation process. I mean, we went from a very traditional yellow tinge as far as the mash goes. I mean, this was a dark brown, and you walk into the fermentation room, and immediately you smell the chocolate in there. So, Race King was one of those things that almost threw me off. And I wasn't a big fan of Race King from the get-go, but as it continued to age and we hit the sweet spot, now it definitely was one of my favorite products. That's one thing that it's so valuable to try different expressions, to do different distillery releases, because you never know when you're going to come across one that might work in a more regular basis. And I think Race King is one of those things that everyone at the distillery loves it. We hear from the consumer standpoint, we hear very similar results that you're talking about. So we're like, how can we incorporate Race King more and more? So we have been making more of it. And
do you have any of the older stuff that still might be sitting around?
I'm sure we could dust off a bottle and
is there a barrel
today?
Did they use all the barrels?
No, there are some OG Race Kings still laying around, and we're really trying to hone in on how can we get that consistent flavor profile and recreate that original release of it, because the original one was special.
Yeah.
And
I can only imagine how hard it was to make that beer, because when you're dealing with those chocolate malts, like they don't play well sometimes with other grains.
The chocolate malt, believe it or not, wasn't too crazy. The one time that I really remember being like, holy shit, this is way different, is our first rye cook. That rye gets so sticky in there.
Cakey.
And it's for a new distiller, you start getting confident in doing one thing and making the 4 grain, or making we called High Gold Mr. Bourbon, because the MR for the malted rye. But then you throw in the rye curveball and you realize, this is a different ball game. And but the chocolate malt wasn't really it wasn't too bad to deal with, thankfully. But as a flavor component, it pops so much, and that's what's cool. We're messing around with different malted mash bills now, doing some American single malts that have some legs to it, and I think they're gonna hopefully get to the market eventually. But and not to step on your toes as far as the tasting goes, but that kind of leads in. Race King very much it was meant to be a limited release, and then hey, people loved it, so we want to do more of it. Same thing with another pour I brought y'all, and this is the Starlino product, is the other product that I have laid out for you. And what Starlino is, it's that Boxer Grail that we talked about that I love. Coming from Wild Turkey, one of my favorite things they made was that 101 rye that was delicious and holds up in a cocktail, and it's great. Our rye, just by comparison, is much more herbal. And what we did is we finished it for about 3 months in a Starlino vermouth cask. And it really brings out some awesome cherry flavors. You get some strong licorice notes, anise that I get off of it. And it's almost like a pre-mixed cocktail for me, in a way.
That just the nose on it's decadent. It's very good.
It's got a very rich nose, but I can get hints of that vermouth, and I'm not a massive vermouth fan. So I'm curious what this is going to taste like.
So while you kind of go into the nosing, I do have a question for you while you're doing that. You mentioned hitting the sweet spot.
Yep.
Now, you've been in your room with your master finisher, your master taster, and yourself, or the master blender, master taster yourself. Have you ever experienced yet you're going down the different barrels, you're doing the different mixes, taste them. Have you, each one of you, just like eye popped all at the same time and says, oh, this is good?
100%. Yeah. I mean, as we're putting, the blending story of Jefferson's, it's an awesome story, and there's so much authenticity to it, which, come from someone like me, who I'm basically in the bourbon industry because of the authenticity. I don't want to work for a company who is just trying to throw marketing pitches out there and doesn't have any validity behind it. The blending story's for real, where we'll sit down and we will taste every single lot that's going into that blend. And no doubt about it, every once in a while you get one and, you sit back and you're like, oh, man, this is it, And sometimes it's so good, we're like, should we not blend this? Should we save this for
stored away for a special rainy day or something like that, or something that happens.
Yeah. So there's the science in blending is not only taking a barrel that can't stand by itself and putting it into something that is more collaborative. It's also realizing, oh man, some of these barrels are really special, and maybe something we haven't even thought about we could come up with to highlight these. We were talking just a few days ago about some Muzanara finishes we have that we thought about blending into a special release. And, the consensus was, well, we don't want the Muzanara to get lost in a blend, and so there is a lot of decision making as far as is it too good for a blend sometimes. And, you see a lot of variation. And, when we hit those, it doesn't happen all the time, but when we hit those special barrels, you can definitely tell just from body language of this is a fan favorite for sure.
I was going to ask that question in that. So do you need to have a poker face when you taste something that's like, holy crap? Mm-hmm. Do you try and have a poker face so you don't?
Yeah, it's almost like who's going to be the first one to talk because no
who's going to break first.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. So we're sitting around and it's so easy to pollute minds when you are tasting in a group. Yep. And
there's the storytelling.
Well, there is a storytelling aspect of it, but you don't want to, paint the picture for people. Mm-hmm. So, I can only tell you, I've done thousands of tastings with people, and every time I start out, I was like, I don't want to be the one to tell you what you taste. And I don't want you all to be insecure about what you're tasting because everyone tastes it a little bit differently. But it is so unique. And I'm not going to lie, there's times when I taste something and I think I have it locked in and certain notes, and then it gets around to one of my colleagues and they say, oh, I get a little bit of cinnamon or something in there. And I didn't taste it all before. Then it's in your mind. You're like, oh, there's that cinnamon. So, we do try to keep it tight-lipped until everyone's taste has their thoughts together, and then we'll go around. And, when you talk about tasting panels, one of the most important things is you can't have a yes man in a tasting panel. You got to have someone that has the courage that there's 10 people in there. They're all saying one thing. It gets around to you. You got to speak your truth.
Confidence and a bit of arrogance, but like for the better cause.
Yeah, arrogance is so present in the world of sensory evaluation that I definitely agree with you. But the best tasters are the ones that realize that just because they're tasting something doesn't mean someone else is going to taste it too.
100%.
And we try to eliminate that at all because there's definitely times where two of us could love something and one of us could be adamant that's not the right move.
If you ever need a butthead, I can step in.
Me too.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, we'll be the bookends.
Okay, good, perfect, perfect.
This is wild.
Oh yeah, I'm about to say
it's very different.
So I mean, I was going to jump in there and just say because I was like, going, man, should I say this? But I mean, it because I've had the gin at Rabbit Hole before, and I will say that. If I didn't know better, if I didn't know this was a bourbon, I would almost say this would have been Rabbit Hole's barrel-aged gin, almost.
No, I can see what you're saying there. Yeah, I mean, it's very botanical there, and the herbs do pop out much more. I never heard that before, but you're totally right. You made me want to make a Negroni with this, honestly. I mean, that is and the gin is one of the sneaky things that we do that is really awesome, where we take a gin, an English dry gin, and we finish it in a rye cask. So you get a lot of those same familiar notes to it. But I totally agree with you. It's definitely not for everyone. But when you're talking about my favorite things that we make, Starlino is right up there for it. And this is something much like the Race King where we want to strive to get this more readily available for people.
I'm not going to lie. I like it better than I thought I would.
Good. All right. We're winning you over. All right.
Now, that being said, it does have an odd, like almost drying effect on your mid palate.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's like almost taking the liquid out of my mouth.
Okay. Yeah.
That's where I was kind of equating it to some of the gin, because to me, gin kind of dries on the palate.
Yeah, dry gin, that makes sense. Yeah.
And are vermouth and Amaro, are they in the same family?
Vermouth tends to be a lot more sweeter,
Yeah.
where Amaro is a bit more bitter a lot of times.
Because like I get like on the nose, and it's
They're like,
it's like a watermelon, like the Rhine.
yeah.
It's a little bit of bitterness. It's
Yeah.
got that, but it's got like almost like that sweetness to it.
Yeah.
And then like balsamic, like on the nose.
No, I can see that. There is a level of complexity there. And, Amaros are something that I'm super interested in. And Brian knows this from being in the family. We have a lemon farm in Sicily where my dad's family came from that we visit from time to time. And they use those lemons to, they sell to Campari to make Averna. So just the whole world of Amaros and how they interact with whiskeys is something that I nerd out on for sure, and how it can complement so well. So I don't disagree with you completely, but there is a bittering aspect that I don't necessarily get overwhelming amount of bitterness in this.
And it's not bitter, but it's like, so when I say balsamic, it's got a different kind of sweetness than what I have in any other thing that I drink.
No, I think there's a uniqueness to this that definitely pops out.
Yeah, and this past Sunday, I was walked through a series of 6 different Amaros that I had never had before. It's so interesting and out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
See, I always thought of Amaro and vermouth kind of being like weird cousins.
Yeah. No, I can see that. I can see that. It's definitely one of those things that, for me personally, and going around and going to these different whiskey bars that are in across the United States, I walk in and a lot of the stuff I can get in Kentucky, I want something that's going to surprise me a little bit. I want something that's going to be a little bit different than your normal pour, and I think this falls into place for that for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Now, for some reason, I keep getting almost like cherries and cream
No
on
doubt.
the nose.
Yeah. I get mad cherries on it for sure.
Yeah, it's got a great nose. I really do enjoy the nose.
So for these 375 limited editions, you've had a bunch of them. Like cognac, I love that stuff. Like that's been one of my favorites.
Yep.
Like I bought as many, so they let me buy 6 of them, and I was as happy as could possibly be. Yeah, and I've gone through 2. Now I've got to slow down in those.
Good. I know what I'm going to give you for Christmas then, right?
Yes, yeah.
So that kind of is a nice segue question. So I assume that Rabbit Hole itself is going to be gauging the popularity of each of these releases.
Yeah.
I don't think you're ever going to break away from your core 4 that you have that's been going on with Rabbit Hole.
Yep.
But do you think these will turn almost into a rotational series that at different times of the year or every other year it's coming out?
I could see Starlino falling into that. I know there's been scuttlebutt about Race King maybe being a fun pre-derby release, a pre-derby release that we could do every year if possible. And these small limited we call it distillery series. What this is it's a fun playground for all of us, and this is really Jake's baby, where he can find different casks and finish it in and find different notes that are yielded. So we have the cognac, we have Muzanara, that was one of our founders' collections. We have, as he mentioned, our most recent one is a maple brulee type finish. We're using maple barrel to pull into it. So we try to be creative. We try to think outside the box. And, of course, if something takes off and there's a popularity level to it, we're going to try to duplicate that.
Yeah, I feel like that's one thing that I really appreciate with what Cave's done with Rabbit Hole in general is I feel like he did a lot of innovation that some people just wouldn't try. I think him being an outsider to the industry, he wasn't afraid to push the envelope to say, hey, these are some really, really neat, complex ideas. Let's take a swing at it and see what happens. Like I in a million years, if somebody would tell me you're going to put 15-year-old Kentucky distillate in a Mizunara cask, I'd have been like, you're out of your mind. Why are you doing this? Like that stuff should be perfectly fine by itself, and then you're going to do that, right? Like
or the Derringer, the taking wheat whiskey and putting it in a PX sherry,
right,
and it becoming a core release,
right? Yeah. So But I mean, well, I'm probably less shocked by that because of the Angels Envies of the world, right? Than I am to take a 15-year-old.
Yeah, I got you.
Kentucky bourbon and finishing it almost seems insane or absurd, right? but it did its thing, and it was something that was very unique, and it was very different. Price point was probably a little crazy. No offense.
No, I mean, yeah.
But that being said, I mean, it was 15-year-old distillate,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, how hard or how often are you going to find that? And then on top of it, you're putting in a Japanese, which I guess is the equivalent of Japanese oak, right, with Mizunara. So
Yeah.
definitely a different thing. And then he was kind of the leading edge on that, right? Like,
no doubt.
And the next thing you know, you saw 4 or 5 of them pop out,
Yeah.
you know, within a year of that. So
And the Mizunara, talking about the price point, it's like, it was a high price whiskey, ultra high end bourbon for sure, premium bourbon.
Christmas.
Yeah, exactly.
Christmas, birthday, and
You might-
anniversary. What are you talking about?
Hey, here's your bottle for the year.
You might get a 50 mil from me. We'll see. But at the same time, when you look at the margins, they were very consistent with everything else. It's like the Mizunara in itself is just so hard to acquire, and it's definitely the age of those trees. It's 100+ years old, and so there is a mystique around that, as you pointed out, is coming out through other people trying Mizunara for sure. So it worked out perfectly, but I agree, there's a certain leap of faith,
Right?
Because there's an investment to get that 15-year-old whiskey, and you don't necessarily know how it's going to end up when you fill that initial cask, and I think the comfort level with taking risk and approaching things with in a mindset where, hey, we're going to try to shake things up, we're going to respect the past, but we want to forge our own path. I think that's what made Rabbit Hole successful, and being a part of that operation from the very beginning, it's not just the quality of the product, it's the people that are surrounding it too. It's one of the most authentic places I've ever worked. You've got people from BBC, from Jim Beam, from Angel's Envy. You got all these unique, like-minded people who come together to create something special. And some of my favorite days at Rabbit Hole were when I was a distiller and we were opening up the distillery, and you went to work and you didn't know when you were going home that night. We needed to run the still through, and there was 18-hour days involved, and you almost feel like there's a bond I still have with those people of going through that, and living in Kentucky and having the opportunity to open a distillery like that and be a part of those ups and downs, and to see what the final product is. I mentioned to you, I brought a bottle of High Gold here, and just this morning it was released that we won the best small batch bourbon in the world for a 10-year and under from the New York World Spirits Competition. Like the thought that I had hands into making that product that's recognized on that level is something that I'll carry with me forever. And I always joke around where before it's all said and done, I got to buy a couple barrels of that whiskey I made just because it's been a dream of mine to be able to do that. And I want to be able to drink that at my daughter's weddings. It's like that is something that's so unique. And so for Cave and Rabbit Hole, give me that opportunity to actually distill that whiskey and to get that experience. It's something I'll never forget.
Did you write on those barrels, some of them?
I should put a little marker on there. Yeah,
Put a couple markers, go out to the Rick House. And that way, when you want to buy them, right, you just tell Cave, cut the check, pay in advance.
Yeah. Well, I think he's got an advantage over me. He knows how bad I want him now, so I'm gonna end up getting hosed, I bet.
He's got you by the cojones.
But the emotional attachment that and I loved working for Jim Beam, and I loved working for Wild Turkey, and it really is the reason I got an opportunity to work for Rabbit Hole. But to build something from the ground up, it's something I can't even put into words. It's a great life experience that I'll definitely never forget. And of course, I'm so emotionally invested in the continued growth into Rabbit Hole as we're strategizing now. What's the next step? How can we better ourselves to position for export markets? It's crazy to think that the whiskey that I had a hand in making is hopefully going to start playing a flag in different parts of the world, and that's an exciting thing. That's what keeps me going in the morning when I get up. And I might have had a rough night the night before, and I roll into the tasting room at 8 a.m. It's not it's not always the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah, you mentioned the having a family still in Italy.
Yep.
What is it going to be like of saying hey you're the distributorship has now kind of said, hey, you can go get what I've made.
Yep.
At your local liquor store in Italy.
Yep. No, it's so funny because the first time we went over there, they were asking what I did, and like there's a language barrier, and it's gonna be a delight for me to be able to go there and buy a bottle of something that I'm doing, and my Sicilian cousins, they've come over to Kentucky. They've seen the only thing they remember, I feel like, is Keeneland. They love horse racing, but they know the cultural tie to bourbon. So it'll be nice to be able to show that off a little bit to the family for sure.
So, hey, we want to be respectful of your time. So let's go through, like, how do people come see you, talk to you? How do they go to Rabbit Hole? Tell us a little bit more about, like, I guess, the hotel and how all that got started, different things. And then we'll kind of enter our way out for that.
For sure, yeah. I mean, Rabbit Hole is unique from the places I worked in the past because it's an urban distillery. It's in the Nulu neighborhood just outside downtown Louisville. It's absolutely been recognized. It's actually been recognized as one of the best distillery tours in the world. So if you're in Louisville and you want a different experience, I definitely push you all to come and stop by and give us a visit. And you walk in there, and it's a totally different feel. The architecture tells a story, and everything is very intentional. We want to be transparent about everything. So, we're right there in the Nulu neighborhood. You mentioned the hotel, and that was a labor of love for Kaveh as well. But it shows his commitment not just to the bourbon industry as a whole, but really contributing to the city and making sure that we have growth in that neighborhood that has been up and coming for 10 years now or so. But Hotel Genevieve is right behind us. So if you're looking for a nice Louisville Saturday, come and visit us. Thank you, sir. Come and visit us at the distillery, then pop by Hotel Genevieve for a drink.
It's swanky. It's real nice. I like it.
It's beautiful. Can't beat it. Yep.
All right. I have to do – you want to do the Johnny question?
You run with it, man. Let's go.
All right. Say it's, end of the world, apocalypse is happening. Mm-hmm. You need to go to the shelf and grab something to drink that either you don't have and you want or that you have sitting in your collection. Mm-hmm. What is your go-to? Because, zombies bit you. You got, like, minutes to live, and you want to enjoy one more pour before you get taken over.
I'll give you my, what I work on answer, and then outside of the Penrod Ricard portfolio answer. Right. If I am jumping in, I know I said I love the Starlino so much. If I'm jumping into one Rabbit Hole product, it might have to be that Mizunara because of how unique it was, and I know what went into that product. So it is a labor of love for me. It's a beautiful, almost like a cedar flavor to it, which really pops. It kind of reminds me of the Buffalo Trace had a LaRue special edition a while ago that had the strong cedar flavor to it. It reminds me of that quite a bit. That just resonates with me. So I love that Mizunara cask. And then outside of it, like when I'm out drinking and having fun with my friends and I don't feel like spending too much money on whiskey, the one I go to is that Bottled and Bond OGD. I love Old Granddad. I think it's a quality product, and I think there's nostalgia behind it that it really resonates with me. So I'm two ends of the spectrum: Mizunara, and then Bottled and Bond OGD.
There's a big price point difference.
Yeah, no doubt.
Is there another unicorn out there that you just absolutely love?
Man, I'm trying to think of what I've tried in the past that's just knocked my socks off. There's some. I wish I had the lot code. There's a Booker's out there that was my absolute favorite when I was at Jim Beam, and some of those Booker releases, and I love how Booker's does that. Where
Grandma's beating biscuits.
I mean, it is.
Oh, dude, it's delicious.
It's so good. And I don't know if they do it intentionally, but there is great variation between batches and Bookers that I greatly appreciate. So when I found one that I love, and I probably still have a couple bottles, I probably bought 18 bottles of it when I was at Jim Beam because they give us our agility allowance where we can spend on products. So that was my gift to myself for a while.
Agility allowance. Yes, that's a hell of a name for it.
Yes. So
you're the least agile ever after drinking whiskey, and they call it the agility allowance.
Bookers is there's a couple of lots of Bookers that really call my name as well.
That's awesome.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So you guys are what's the address for Rabbit Hole?
711 East Jefferson Street.
And if are people allowed to ask you questions? And if so, how do they get in touch with you?
If you go to my good friends at the front desk at the brand center, you say, "Hey, I want to pick Matt's mind for a little bit." that is honestly one of my favorite things to do when I'm out and about, and when I'm at restaurants. I was in Austin, Texas, watching my Kentucky Wildcats play a couple weeks ago, and there's a sweet couple at the bar I started talking to, and I gave them my number. I said, "You come and see me whenever you want." Those are examples of the connections you make in the industry. Yeah. And if I was just doing this to make money, I couldn't do it. I'm not very financially motivated. I love the connection, and I love the kick that people get out of what we do, and I love the pride we take in what we do. So, if you come in and you say, "I have a couple questions for Matt," they'll call me, and I'll come and I'll show you around a little bit, and it builds that authenticity. Because there are real people behind the brand, and it doesn't just stop with me. Being in operations, you realize the amount of talent that goes into having a strong operations team. The importance of a maintenance manager. Shout out to my boy Brian Newton, who's one of the best. You don't succeed as a distillery unless you have the people like Brian Newton, who I just mentioned, or David Sachs, or Greg Four. There are so many people at Rabbit Hole who do such a great job making whiskey, but outside of that are just quality people. And if I'm a consumer, of course you want quality whiskey, but it has to mean something knowing it's coming from people who are really passionate about what they're doing.
Yeah, but I took the tour, I think about it was in late 22, and it was a great time. We had a great experience, especially at the tasting at the very end. There was like a couple of people just kind of swung in and said hi with the big group while the tastings were going on, and then also offering up the gin as well during that tasting, because I was about to say, I don't know, at the time, because I'm not a huge gin fan in general, but wife tasted it, and she's like, oh wow. And she's like, you need to try this.
Yeah. No, my summertime drink is a Rabbit Hole Gin Negroni. Love it. Beautiful thing. And we really are just a big family, and we've been through the growth of everything together. So, I think the friendships I've made there will last a long time. And I think as a consumer myself, there is a need for mega distilleries. There's so many huge distilleries that do such a great job, and I respect that so much. But it can't just be all that. It has to be the smaller distilleries. Not saying we're small. We're still a top 20 whiskey producer in the world, but in comparison, we're making 90 to 100 barrels a day. We're not making 1,000. And I think that it's important that as bourbon continues to grow, we have a wide variety of different distilleries. You need the people making 1 or 2 barrels a day. You need the people making 50 to 60. You need different variations of the story of bourbon, because not one distillery can tell that story completely. It's important that as things are growing and bourbon's becoming more mainstream, they realize the history it plays in our state, and that's really what keeps me going. I love the fact that people come in, they want to do horse racing, and they want to do bourbon, and that's my childhood, basically, and I love that.
Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show. We greatly appreciate you sharing your time and your talent and your treasure with us. It's always nice to talk to and have a conversation with somebody who has kind of been around the block. And what I love about your story the most is the fact that you started as the tour guide, right? You started as, JQ guide, walking around people, telling them, the story that they tell you to tell people, and then you kind of worked your way through that process. So, man, thanks so much for sharing that with us. We greatly appreciate it. If you want to find Bourbon Barrel Talk, you can find us on Facebook, the Instagram, or the X. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe button. That way you get your episodes as soon as they drop on Sunday morning. This is Scott, Matt, Brian, and Nick. Is that your name?
Maybe.
Signing off. Peace.
Prost.
To infinity.